Oh God. Like that was painful to me. And I thought we've all been in that cab with that asshole.
Yes.
We've all been in that cab. Hey everyone, welcome back to America's hottest movie chat show, Cinemaball. I'm here with my co-host and opponent, Carolyn Pettit. Hey, Carol.
Hey, hey, hey.
This is the first episode of the second round of your favorite film freakout. If you stuck with us through the highs and lows of round one, you will know that Carolyn scored a sneaky field goal by making us watch Hard Target. So we all got to watch JCVD punch that snake. So she is currently ahead 3-0 and always ahead in our hearts. But I do feel like this is my round, Caro. So I am going to bring the heat.
I am, as I said in our mid-season report or whatever we called it. Yeah, I'm definitely feeling like I have to play some serious defense here because you, as your goal film, The Legend of Billie Jean, you have chosen a film that really requires me to be on my guard because it's got so many talented and prolific folks involved with it. So good on you for making me do my work here as the defender.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what it is that I'm hungry. When in sports, when someone like has to come from behind, they say that person is hungry. Like I am hungry to get victory. So I'm gonna be vicious. So in case you don't know, Cinemaball is a ridiculous excuse for Caro and I to talk about movies. Our goal in the game is to connect one movie to another through actors, directors, catering directors, whatever. Our goal movie,
you better not pull some craft services stuff on me.
I will do whatever it takes to win, Caro.
Yeah, you will.
So as Caro said, our goal movie in this round is the 1985 teen classic, The Legend of Billie Jean, and I am on offense.
She was a fugitive to the police. A sensation to the media. And a symbol of courage to young people everywhere to fight for what's right.
Where is she?
Everywhere.
The Legend of Billie Jean, directed by Matthew Robbins, featuring Pat Benatar's hit song Invincible, rated PG-13.
Caro's on defense, so she got to choose our starting film. She decided to slip on her Doc Martens, smoke a few clove cigarettes, and return us to the land of 1990s indie darling Jim Jarmusch via his 1991 anthology film, Night on Earth. At the end of this episode, I get to return Caro's cinematic serve with a movie of my own, but for now, it's time to turn on the meter for this late night cab ride head uptown. Caro, tell us a little bit about Night on Earth.
Yeah, so, as you mentioned, it is a 1991 anthology film by Jim Jarmusch, whose more recent work includes films like Only Lovers Left Alive, very, very prolific, well-respected American kind of indie filmmaker. What makes Night on Earth unique? Well, many things, but this is a film in which each of the 5 sort of short films that come together to make up the whole is set in a different taxi cab in a different city. And so ostensibly all taking place on the same night on Earth. And so you have initially a story set in Los Angeles, Winona Ryder playing a cab driver named Corky who finds studio, movie-making executive Gina Rollins in her cab. You have in New York Armin Mueller-Stahl as a not very good cab driver, not very road, safe cab driver who picks up Giancarlo Esposito. And then, you have one sequence set in Paris, one set in Rome, and the 5th and final takes place in Helsinki. And, just so even before we sort of jump into the particular, specifics of any of these stories, I want to say that I just think as a visual film, this movie really works because the bulk of the movie is going to be it's the same shot where you have you have the driver in the foreground, like on the right side of the frame, and then the passenger sort of in the background, in the back seat, on the left side of the frame. And this, format just really lets you observe like the faces of these actors, right? And I mean, these are by and large, such actors with such fascinating faces to begin with, that I just found like, wow, what a great just sort of concept for a film it's so, intimate, just inherently, and it just really lets you feel like you're kind of there in the moment and in the space with these characters.
Yeah, okay. So those of you who listen to our mid-season report will know that I expressed some delight when I thought about getting to talk about this movie. It turns out that the movie I thought was Night on Earth I think I conflated Night on Earth with oh God!
Earth Girls Are Easy,
and Lost Highway, a film with David Byrne, and I'm blanking on the name of it right now. But in my mind, there was like mixed up together.
Like True Stories or something like that?
Yes. So I think, like in my mind, Night on Earth was kind of, a third Night on Earth, a third True Stories, and a third some other, random film, whatever. So I was really excited after the Winona Ryder segment when they're in Los Angeles, when that ended and we go to New York, and I was like, I haven't seen this before. I thought I had seen this movie before, but it turns out I hadn't, right?
Uh-huh.
So I just want to talk a little bit about the experience of watching this film, because this film really pays back such dividends if you are willing to consume it on its schedule and at its rhythm, right?
Yes.
So Jim Jarmusch, as a filmmaker, talks about kind of like real life rhythms. His movies are not particularly like plot driven. They are very much character driven. And so that means that conversations happen at a speed that can feel false if you are used to the kind of accelerated rhythm of mainstream film, right? And so it took me a minute to get used to that and to get out of the headspace of thinking like, is something going to happen? Should we be heading towards a climax in this scene? Is there going to be like, a payoff in terms of jokes or, action or whatever? That's not what this film is about. And once you kind of surrender to that feeling, it feels like you are on one of those late night cab rides that we've all taken, right? That kind of like late night trying to head home. You exist in a different space. The city is different. You are different. Time, you're not experiencing time in the same way. And so although there are things about the film that that I was like, okay, I'm ready for this to be over. Notably, the segment in Rome where I thought I would have committed murder if I was in that cab. I wouldn't be a victim of Roberto Benigni's extended, hyper dialogue there. I would have committed murder. But but apart from that, like it hangs together so incredibly well. And I think, like even the film's opening itself, like the opening credits, as we, pan over this globe, right? Like the way it looks, and Tom Waits' kind of carnival-esque hurdy-gurdy music prepares you in a way for something that's going to be just slightly left of center.
It's right. It's the carnival of human life, right?
Yeah.
Is sort of what we're being set up for, and the sense that by using that actual kind of rotating globe of Earth, this kind of makeshift globe of Earth in the very beginning, it kind of sets you up to realize that these are only 5 stories, in a cavalcade of human experience that is so much larger, right, than what we're about to see.
Yeah.
Tom Waits' music it's the music of beat up things and used things, and so we start with Los Angeles, but it is not, at least not initially, the glamorous, wealthy, the Los Angeles. It is the Los Angeles of little, of bodegas and little, fast food joints and stuff like that. We meet Corky, played by Winona Ryder, who's driving her like station wagon of a cab around. But juxtaposed with this, like these early introductions to Corky, are shots and scenes of Gina Rollins as a woman named Victoria Snelling, which is a name that itself just sort of exudes, maybe wealth or privilege. It just has that kind of ring to it. Getting off a private jet, no less, and pulling out a cell phone at a time when cell phones were like very much a mark of like status and exclusivity. And so there's a fascinating thing that happens where they're both, they're in different scenes, they're in different shots for a while, and then, Corky makes her drop off of these two, these like metalheads from a band named Utensil or something. And so she's like outside on a payphone calling in, trying to figure out like what is she going to do next. And then into her world, into the frame and into the world steps Victoria Snelling, who, is now kind of in Corky's world, right? She has emerged from like the experience of the private jet and everything. Right. And she's now there next to this young woman who's got this beat up, station wagon cab. And so circumstance kind of flings these two women who come from two very different experiences of Los Angeles, together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I loved the framing of this film in cabs, because even though you do have someone like, Gina Rollins' character, coming from that private jet, and then in the vignette in Paris, you have these Cameroonian diplomats. Nevertheless, there's something about cabs, right? And especially like late night cabs. Like you're not going to a place of business. You're not being dropped off, downtown at a skyscraper, right? There's something so down market about those late night cabs, and so the insistence upon like the grubbiness of the vehicle, that still works, is still getting these people where they need to do, and is doing this kind of phenomenal magic of bringing people from all these different walks of life together. Yeah. But it refuses to be shiny, and it refuses to kind of, like wear a gloss. I think about just like the fact that this movie is made in 1991. This movie doesn't get made, let alone like, the fact that the indie movie landscape has changed like radically since the 90s. But this particular movie doesn't get made in the year of our Lord 2018 with our culture of Uber and Lyft, where we demand that the people who pick us up have, immaculate, like Lexus cars, but we're going to pay them less than we would actually pay for a cab.
Yeah. And that, I'm glad you mentioned that, because, with the Corky story in particular, the first story. So Corky, she wants to be a mechanic. She comes from the world of manual labor, right? Her brothers are mechanics. We see she's got this wrench, and other tools like hanging off of her waist and stuff. Like she is, we can see her getting grimy, getting greasy. So at the end of their time together, Gina Rollins offers Corky like the opportunity of a lifetime, right? She is like, I want, she's been searching for an actor to fill a certain role and struggling, like not finding anyone who's maybe quite right. And she has this flash of inspiration. Oh my God, Corky is perfect. I want to make you a movie star. I want to make, make your dreams come true. But Corky's dreams are already set. Corky dreams of being a mechanic. She wants to live in that world. And what made me sad as that story ended and Corky drives off in her station wagon is that I wanted so much to feel personally. I wanted so much to feel like, you know what? Corky's going to be all right. She's got it. She knows what she wants to be. She knows what she wants to do. She's going to be all right. But knowing what I know of where we are now and the reality of, as you said, like Uber and Lyft and stuff, and the the fading of the kind of that world that Corky sees herself in. Yeah, like I don't really know that she's going to be all right. So yeah.
Although, you know, I am gratified that we do have her saying no, because in the mainstream version of this film, of course, she says yes and her life changes. Right?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So I was glad that we got that. I couldn't take my eyes off young Winona Ryder. Like, I just remember when she looked so fragile isn't the word, because she never looked fragile, but there was something so unearthly about her particular kind of beauty. And to have her, you know, dressed up like this tomboy, you know, like it was just so perfect. You know, her kind of small body contrasted with Gina Rowland's kind of, you know, very like kind of old school Beverly Hills kind of glamour in this movie. I have to say, though, in the scene, and I don't want to spend the whole time talking about the LA part, although I have to say, of all the cities that we saw at night, perhaps it's because, you know, I'm a Los Angelino, but there's something about LA at night that just, I don't know what it is. It just hits every single one of my buttons. I loved it. I loved the 24-hour donut shops and the, you know, slightly disreputable looking gas stations that we passed by. There was just something about like LA at night. Is it the noir thing? I don't know, but I was so into it.
And I think we'll move on from LA, the LA segment in a moment, but I do want to say a few more quick things about it myself as well. Like Jarmusch is so good at capturing that kind of beauty of American cities. Like Only Lovers Left Alive, I think it does a similar thing with Detroit, where it just makes you see the beauty in the way the city is kind of run down, right? And you know, and I just felt like I felt at home in a sense with that Los Angeles. Like it reminded me of how when I was young, you know, we lived not too far from the Van Nuys Airport, and like a thing, you know, we had very little money, and like a thing we would do for fun, my mom and I, you know, is we'd go like just park by the Van Nuys Airport and watch planes like take off and land, and like that was like a thing. And you know, it's like it reminds me of like that Los Angeles. And but the other thing I also just quickly want to touch on is that Corky's decisions of like, oh, she says that's not a real life for me, or I have my life planned out. It, for whatever reason, it made me flash back to a memory, and this has to be from like 20 years ago now or something. I don't remember exactly when it was, but you know, speaking of like hindsight and everything, I remember seeing Johnny Depp on, I think it was Charlie Rose. It was certainly some, you know, sort of serious interview program. And, you know, at one point and you know, there's a certain cultural connection between Winona Ryder and Johnny Depp, right? They were this like, this famous, you know,
Winona
couple.
Forever.
Winona Forever, right? And I remember Johnny on the show, so Charlie Rose or whoever the interviewer was asked him like, you know, what would you keep making movies if they stopped offering you like interesting, if the movies you got to make stopped being interesting? Because this is when like pretty much every film he was in was something like art, you know, respectful in an artistic sense, right? They were not so much, it was like What's Eating Gilbert Grape and the Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and you know that whole kind of period of Depp's filmography, and he said, I remember this very well. I remember he said that he'd rather, you know, rather than making uninteresting movies, he'd rather go back to working at a gas station, and like clearly that has not been the path that he has chosen, you know, but also like that, you know, it just reminded me of like Corky is in that world of gas stations, and like that's what she considers real, and yet the world will increasingly over the next like 10, 15, 20 years kind of erode in some ways the viability and the reality of that realm in which she exists.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and it's not to suggest that, Corky, as, quintessentially, herself as she is, and as certain as she is of what she wants, she is nevertheless like very young, and the movie is very gentle with her youth. And so when she talks about like wanting to have a family, but wanting to take it slow, finding the right guy, whatever. And I was like, Corky, it's because you're queer. You're never going to find the right guy. But but when she talks about like, but I want to have, a bunch of kids, but just boys. Right. Because she can't even imagine, a position in which she has baby girls who are like her, right?
Right.
Like,
right,
I think
right.
there's a part of her that recognizes like how unique she feels, and how, as you say, how much lack of viability there is for women to kind of exist in that particular space. It's just, presumed to be easier to be a boy and to raise boys.
Yeah.
So. Anyways, LA section, great. And like I said, in terms of, the cities at night that we saw, LA was, I think, probably my favorite. It just felt like home. But moving on to New York.
Yeah.
And Giancarlo Esposito, who, along with Delroy Lindo, I feel like they need to be getting way more work than they're getting.
I agree.
Those are two actors where I just feel like you need to be in minimum 2 projects a year that I'm watching.
Yeah.
Just
and I mean,
amazing.
Right. And, so, I mean, Giancarlo Esposito, he had a substantial role on Breaking Bad for a few seasons. Good for him. But this film, reminded me of, so in this, again, this is 91. He's younger, but he just has such an energy, like a crackling energy to him that is just captivating. And there's such a wonderful contrast between his kind of like this kind of barely controlled, almost like enthusiasm and energy, and Armin Mueller-Stahl as this German taxi driver named Helmut, who's very kind of very quiet, very kind of, he's like observing and processing and trying to like take things in and make sense of things. And so just that dynamic between them, it works really well.
Absolutely. I mean, I love Armin Mueller-Stahl, and excuse me, the role that is very much associated with him for me is still Eastern Promises, where he carries that just frightening, quiet menace.
Right.
Excuse me, but he is such a wonderful actor. And to see, like, he's so soft and receptive to everything, to every experience, to Brooklyn, and to, Rosie Perez's loud ass in the background with her squeaky voice, and, checking out the fact that his hat and Yo-Yo's hat are the same thing.
Yeah.
Like, he's just so... I wanted to be in a cab with them. Like, of the 5 cabs that we saw over the evening, I probably would have had the best time in that cab. That, like, I imagine you would have been laughing the entire drive.
Yeah. I mean, it's that gag, it's so great. So, Giancarlo's character, whose name we learn is Yo-Yo, he keeps calling Helmut Helmet, right?
Yes.
He keeps calling him Helmet, and he's like, that's like calling somebody lampshade,
Yeah.
It's like this object, right? It's like, it's a thing you put on your head, and then when Helmut asks him, like, well, what's your name? And he says his name is Yo-Yo.
Yes,
it's so great. Oh my God. And like, Helmut is like, but that's a thing. This is a toy, or whatever. And he's like, no, man.
Yeah, no,
like,
it's different.
No,
yeah.
it's totally different.
It
so
was
good.
It was great. And I mean, just from the beginning of that vignette, where Giancarlo Esposito, Yo-Yo, is trying to hail a cab and absolutely,
Right.
like he would, the only reason he's in Helmut's cab is because no one else will stop for him, and that's real, So you have these two dudes, who are kind of thrown together by fate, but who are able to have like a real, actual human connection. And we're so glad that they met each other. And then, in the way that the vignette ends where, Helmut with his bad driving self, takes off, not knowing how to really drive a car, not knowing where the hell he's going. And you're worried about him. You have, in the few minutes that we've gotten to spend with him, I felt so protective. I was worried, that if this trip itself, the ride back to Manhattan, didn't get him, then the mean streets of New York as a whole might be too much for a person like him. Yeah. But then the lights hit his face. God takes care of, fools and children, right? Like we just know he's going to be okay.
Yeah, we do. And yet, I just think that that was the moment, that time that we spend with Helmut when he's alone again after dropping off Yo-Yo. And, Yo-Yo does what he can. He's like, do you know where you're going? Do you know how to get back? And, but of course, Helmut's not making real sense of the directions and everything. And just that time that we spend with Helmut in the cab when he's alone again, it made me think about how much compassion this film has for its characters. And it wants us to care for them as they go back into the world alone, and by doing that, it seems it seems to me to have just a very human, by lifting up like the individual experience of this person alone in New York. There's the sense in which it then sort of lifts all of us up as people who are sometimes lonely or solitary or what have you. It's right. But because of the way in which it's trying to tell this range of stories about this range of people, and I do take issue a little bit with the fact that the film is called Night on Earth. And what do we get? We get two American cities, like two European cities, and one like Scandinavian city or something. It's like there's no Karachi, there's no
there's nothing in Africa. In fact, the camera slides up the globe, over the entire continent of Africa. I don't even know that we spend too much time even passing over Asia, except in the very, initial credit run that opens the film. And I was like, I get it. I understand that, Jim Jarmusch chose the cities to feature based kind of upon who he wanted to work with, in Paris and Helsinki, et cetera. But I was like, there is a part of me that's like, Night on Earth, but really? Like, there's no Dakar, no Tokyo, no Beijing. Come on.
Yeah. So then from New York, yes, we do go to Paris, where we are in the cab of this black French cab driver, and as you mentioned earlier, he's driving around these two like diplomats, and it's not racism because they're black, but like I don't know how to. I'm at a loss for how to talk about it because they are judging him as being a lower black person.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think certainly here in the West, there is this criminal inability to differentiate between the many nations and peoples in Africa, right? And so one of the things that's, great about this film is that, it doesn't allow for that, right? So you have these diplomats who I believe are from Cameroon, if I'm remembering correctly, making fun of Isaac Debunkele's character, whose name I'm forgetting, but who's from the Ivory Coast. And there are tremendous, not rivalries, but tensions between various nations in Africa, in the same way that there's a whole conversation to be had about the tensions between like African immigrants and African Americans. But they're very patronizing towards him. There's definitely something with class going on there, and that he is in a service position, driving them around. They are representatives narratives of a higher class, and they are, flashy about it and very loud and vocal about it. And they continue to call him little brother and be, quite dismissive and rude to his face until he actually kicks them out of the cab. And, so you start the vignette in Paris. And by the way, Isaac Debanco is one of the most beautiful people I've ever seen in my life. And he is lit like something magical in this film.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because, it's so true that so often Black people are not lit properly on camera, on screen. Yeah. But oh my God, I mean, yes, like the lighting in that cab, like the way we, I mean, his face was certainly my favorite face to just observe in this film because, there's so much going on there. There's anger that's kind of tightly controlled and reined in. But yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. Like, I don't know what to say about it other than just it's a beautiful face. It's
absolutely, and the the irritation, the frustration, the hurt on his face as he listens to people who look like him, and two as we will see at the end, two white French people might as well be the exact same as him. There's no differentiation between any African nations, right? To have these people who should have some common cause with him, be as patronizing and dismissive, we see the toll that it takes on him. And so, initially, I'm sympathetic to him, right? But then when the actual like focus of that vignette comes into play, or the passenger, who is a blind woman, then, I'm becoming really, really uncomfortable with his character because he is doing the most creepy staring. He asks her the most inappropriate questions.
Well, exactly.
It is horrifying to sit there. And as I say, like this is happening with kind of that feel of real time, right? So you're uncomfortable and you have to sit in your discomfort and anxiety for this woman who, resists being infantilized in any way because of her blindness. Yeah. But nevertheless, you're like, you are... And like any woman is sort of, unable to stop this from happening.
Right. But there's that fascinating kind of, based on his appearances, people put him into boxes that are incorrect, that are wrong, that are harmful. And then, yes, he has this blind woman as a passenger, and his questions to her, like, they are in some ways, what they reminded me of, in a sense, is the kinds of questions that like the shit white girls ask to Black girls of just coming from such a place of ignorance and also of othering, right?
Yes.
Because he asks things like like what's it like in bed? Like, how do you know who's next to you? Like, he doesn't understand that there are other ways of seeing a person or of sensing a person's body or beauty than just through the eyes, right?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, just all that whole line of inquisition, and I mean, the way that she just kind of tries to shut it down every step of the way, but also she is trapped in that cab and she can't just like walk away from it. Yeah, as you say, it's uncomfortable, but it's also perceptive. I mean, It is because, like as soon as she is out of the cab, right, like the very next thing that happens to him, right, is he gets into a fender bender, and the person who he hits says something like, "I'm not racist, but you drive like a black."
Yeah.
And so, like, it's all about those ways in which people are categorized or grouped based on things that are like, they're just false things from which to extrapolate a person's like entire humanity or experience or or whatever, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I think, it would have been very easy to continue to have that driver's character continue to be, kind of sympathetic and to be, kind of long suffering. That would have been a very easy thing to do. But to show the ways in which he is both, dismissive and, judgmental, and also the victim of that, was very smart.
Right.
I also loved how, for me, this was the shift in the film where you realize you don't have to like the characters, we're very still unused to films, to TV shows, to books in which we are not, supposed to like the character. That we may disagree with them, that can feel very distancing. And I think, this came sort of perfect. Like, of course, based upon the way the movie is structured, and according to time zones, like we had to go from New York to Paris to Rome.
Yes.
But I also think, like, thematically and, via the narrative, Paris comes at a great point because I had such a great time in New York with Yo-Yo and Helmut. But there are more stories out there. Like, there are all kinds of people out there, and none of us is all one thing or another. And, in the space of 20 minutes, we see one guy being discriminated against, having to deal with some assholes, and then being the asshole himself.
Exactly.
That's life.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't know how much I have to say about Rome and the Roberto Benigni.
Oh God, that was painful to me, and I thought it's just we've all been in that cab with that asshole.
Yes,
we've all been in that cab.
And yet, like, I mean, I think it's such a great showcase for Benigni's manic energy, which depending on the film and the context it's in can be and for me it can be entertaining, it can be wonderful, or it can be like just obnoxious. But so we spent a lot of time actually with him alone in the cab, just talking to himself, and talking to, having full on like conversations with himself, like, oh, Genius Hotel, what a name for a hotel, like, here's Albert Einstein. Oh, Albert Einstein, say hello to, Picasso, whatever, whoever the people he picks as geniuses. And he's just having a whole scenario play out in his head. And I think my favorite just little detail, like little detail of the whole Roberto Benigni segment is that when he's talking to the radio dispatcher, so when one person stops talking on those, there's the kind of the buzz of static or whatever, the bzz, right, and Roberto Benigni, like, he says his thing, like, and what he's saying is ridiculous, of course, but he's talking about, he's asking for information about where to go to pick up his next passenger, but the way he's phrasing it is like, okay, so where shall I meet you so that we can make love or whatever. Like, of course, he's just. But at the end of every statement of his, he just goes like, he just with his lips, with his mouth, he makes a sound, and it's like, that to me was just like the one thing that kind of stuck with me from that whole sequence.
Yeah. The one thing I have to admit, I was uncomfortable as once the priest, who is not a bishop,
very much not a bishop.
Yes. I think it comes. He's already started to have his heart attack, but I don't think we know that he's dead yet. And Roberto Benigni drives past these two sex workers on the street, right?
Yes.
And I remember thinking, like, I'm not sure if the film is trying to other them in a way that I'm not comfortable with, like, as a way to kind of highlight, like, how ridiculous Roberto Benigni's character is. Like, oh, look at the kind of people that he hangs out with and who find him charming. I wasn't quite sure how to read it. I might go back and watch that if I can stand it, because honestly, like, Roberto Benigni's energy is a lot for me. And I say that recognizing that my energy is a lot for people, but I was exhausted by him.
I mean, it's probably just my sort of predisposition to thinking that Jarmusch has a charitable outlook toward humanity in general and toward the outsiders in particular, that I don't think he intended those sex workers to be images of ridicule, though certainly that doesn't mean that the film is successful in that regard, and that many viewers may not have interpreted them as such, right?
Yeah.
But
Maybe it was simply because like the tone of that segment itself is so over the top that had had they appeared elsewhere, because like you, I don't impute any ill will specifically to Jim Jarmusch. I think he's pretty right on in most ways. So maybe it was just because tonally I thought like, no, the fact that these women are here doing what they're doing is not ludicrous. Who they are is not ludicrous. So I don't want that to get lumped in with the rest of the kind of, absurdity of this particular vignette. So like I said, I'm not sure, where I came down on that. No. Something that stuck with me.
It's absolutely worth speaking about in the context of this film. 100%. Yeah. So Roberto Benigni happens. Also, I want to say that Rome, to me, if there's, and it's probably partially because I've spent so little time in cities like that, in Europe at all, that for whatever reason, Rome, seeing his tiny little cab just like vroom down these like narrow, streets and everything. That for me was the city that just visually I found the most kind of captivating, right? Like, I want to stroll down these, cobblestone streets and things like that. I just found, and I love the way that Jarmusch, whether it's New York or Rome or wherever, you can tell that when he's just doing those kind of exterior shots, those urban, the shots of the environment, that he deliberately wants to get, like, if there's graffiti or something, if there's like marks of, people's presence that are what some people would call like ugly or something, like he wants those in the shot. Like he doesn't want sterile cities. He wants cities that feel lived in, right?
Yeah.
So moving on to the fifth and final segment, which is in Helsinki. You have this cab driver named Mika, I think was his name, who picks up these three men. They're obviously like completely wasted. They've been out drinking for who knows how long, and there's and it's because one of them got laid off and from his job and had just a really awful day in general.
Yeah.
And basically, like, for the most part, this segment becomes about the cab driver telling his own story of woe and sorrow and grief, and it's there's this very kind of this thing that I think maybe happens more between men or whatever, but that I kind of dislike, but I think it rings true, where Mika is like, he hears about that Aki's the person who's been laid off. He hears about Aki's day, and he's like, that's not not so bad. Like, it's like we have to play like the grief Olympics or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, Aki's having a really shitty day. Like, let's acknowledge that he's having a really shitty day.
Right.
But then, and I'm not familiar with the actor who plays Mika from anything. I don't know him. But it is very compelling to watch this kind of, emotionally closed off man tell this story of grief and loss.
So the segment in Helsinki was my favorite of the five, and I wasn't prepared for that to be the case. I didn't expect for it to be the case, but it was. And part of it is because it's the final segment, and it's the closest to dawn, and so the way we see the light slowly change, it's my favorite time. It's so quiet, and it's winter time, and the deadening effects of the snow on the ground, and the fact that no one is awake except for these men. They're almost on the earth alone.
It enhances that, the cabs, as you said earlier, are they're places of transit to begin with. They are kind of these ephemeral spaces, that these places that exist between other places, right? We are only in them briefly. They they aren't meant to kind of stay with us. And then, yes, as you say, like that shifting toward dawn, toward the morning light coming, only enhances that kind of otherworldliness, right? Or that kind of sense of being in a transitional place that is not so much a place in and of itself, but just a time and place between other times and places.
Yeah, and when you think about the city that they travel through, it's the most, or at least rather, kind of stereotypically urban looking space. It's Helsinki, right?
Yes.
And obviously
yes.
I don't know the population density of Finland's capital city, but it doesn't look like the other cities that we've seen so far in any way, both in the number of, lights we see or the types of businesses. So it's tangibly different, but also the way this vignette like folded me in, it starts with this kind of, ludicrous scene of Mika driving around and around this statue in a circle. And then when he goes to pick up these three just stupidly drunk dudes, there's this moment of like very funny physical comedy where the dudes are all falling asleep, kind of balancing on each other. And when the two on the end step away, the guy in the middle, their friend Aki, just kind of, falls to the ground. And then, at the very end, there's a kind of return to that kind of, almost puppet-like kind of physical comedy. But because of the deep sadness that's not weeping and, gnashing of teeth, but nevertheless, this kind of deep sadness, it reminded me of like a Samuel Beckett play. It felt very European in the way that it kind of said like, this is life and it is absurd and it is what it is, just like it is what it is. And so I had the fewest amount of notes. Like I wrote the least in this segment because I was so just captivated. Like I was in that scene. I don't know why like emotionally it hit, other than to speak to like, when it took place and the way that these men, kind of existed in this very kind of theatrical space, like puppets in a way.
Yeah. And what I appreciated about it as well is that so the men in the cab, Mika and as well as the other two passengers, Aki's friends, they all sort of end up kind of dismissing Aki's troubles, right? They kind of end up like being like, oh, Mika, yes, your story is so sad. Yes, Aki, what is Aki complaining about? He has nothing to complain about.
Right.
And they, ultimately like Aki just gets left
poor
near
Aki.
home, like on the side of the road. And then just as like dawn is happening, and yet we, the viewer, we stay with Aki. Like the cab drives off, his friends walk off, and we just stay there with Aki. And to me, that is again the film, not unlike what it does when it stays with Helmut for a bit after he drives off and is alone again. It is again the film asserting like, look, Aki is worthy of compassion. He is worthy of acknowledgement, right? His experiences are valid, even as the other people don't really acknowledge that. The film does, and I appreciate that so much.
Me too.
Yeah.
Well, we have spoken a lot about this film, but it is now time to wrap up our discussion of Night on Earth with one of my favorite segments, in which we pair this week's film with another film that we think offers an interesting parallel. So I want you to allow Carol and I to use our vast cinematic knowledge to tempt your taste buds into watching a movie that we think pairs nicely with Night on Earth, like a fava beans and a nice Chianti. Let us be your sommoviers. Carol, do you have a film you would like to pair with Night on Earth?
I do. One thing I love about Night on Earth is that it's intrinsically saying about these drivers, these laborers, that their work has value. They have value. That these jobs that some may kind of look down on or whatever. Like, this film does not do that. This film treasures the I think the working people, and so it made me think of a film. It's a 2012 film that I absolutely loved, and it is, to be clear, it is very, very much in, it's a little less maybe quirky. It's not Jarmuschian, but it is very much paced at the pace, the rhythm of life, of a slow but believable kind of life. It's an Austrian-American film called Museum Hours. And this film is, similar, to keep with the theme of like kind of observing and acknowledging the value in even in different kinds of work. This is a film that focuses largely on a man named Johann, who's probably, I'd say he's probably in his, early mid-60s or something. And his job, like what he does at this point in his life, he's had so many jobs throughout his life, but what he does at this point in his life is he works as a guard at this art museum in Vienna. And, the film, and he ends up developing a kind of connection, a friendship with a woman from, I believe from America, who is in the city because a friend of hers is sick, and so she's visiting Vienna. And, they strike up this kind of unlikely friendship. But, it's similar to Night on Earth. It's a film that's very much rooted in, like, a workplace. It's very much about, like, a person's work and the value in their life and their life experience as they do that work. And I just found it an utterly, utterly captivating film. So Museum Hours, it's been on and off of Netflix. I don't know if it's available there currently, but if you enjoy these kinds of films that are very observant about their characters, that really take their time, I highly recommend Museum Hours.
I am so excited. I have never heard of this film, and I am so excited to check it out. So this is what the sommovier can do for you, people. I would never have gone this deep into the wine cellar, so I'm excited about this. My pairing for Night on Earth is the movie that I thought we were watching, True Stories. So this is True Stories comes out in 1986. It's actually directed by David Byrne, famously of Talking Heads. So just reading real quick the tagline from IMDb. A small but growing Texas town filled with strange and musical characters celebrates its sesquicentennial and converge on a local parade and talent show. That doesn't give you any kind of a sense of the weirdness of this film, but if you have
any sense of David Byrne's artistic output whatsoever,
yeah,
I think you know that it's not going to be a conventional
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. And I remember watching this as a kid, and so I assume it must have been on like HBO or something, because there ain't no way my parents took me to see True Stories at the theater, and there's no way like I would have heard of it and spent my hard-earned Kool-Aid money on this at the Frontier Mall, going to see this. So I assume it was on HBO at some point. But I do remember it blowing my mind because I didn't know that movies could be like this. I was still very far from being the sort of person who could say, like, I like what's happening, but just the fact that it kind of opened me up to the fact that there were people doing different kinds of things in films, things that perhaps you couldn't expect. And that, you didn't have to do what was expected of you,
yes.
To still make art. And I knew who David Byrne was. I mean, I wasn't a Talking Heads fan particularly, but I knew who he was. And so it was also a revelation to me. This sounds so, ridiculous, but remember, I was a child. I didn't know that you could do more than one thing. Like, I knew he was a musician. And so the fact that he directed a film and acted in a film, I was like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. Like, literally, I didn't know you could be talented in more than one area. I didn't know that you could say things in more than one way. So I'm encouraging people, check out True Stories. It is the film that for some reason I conflated with Night on Earth and thought we were watching this week. But it is worth watching in its own right. So there you go.
Nice.
All right, so
Nice.
Carol, it is now time for us to render our verdicts on this film using my little brother's patented 100-star scale. Now, folks, as you will recall from round one, Carol and I employ the clearly superior 100-star scale to rate these flicks, as 5 stars simply doesn't allow for enough nuance, at least according to my Rotten Tomatoes loving younger brother.
What's the difference between a 5-star and a 4-star? 1 star? That doesn't tell me nothing. That don't tell me nothing at all. I hear your arguments out there. Oh, well, it makes sense. There's a mathematical equation. I don't like it. I need it graded. Rotten Tomatoes has it nearly perfect. I know a 98% movie is awesome. I'm going to go watch it. I know a 65%, I'm going to save my money and bootleg it.
So, and just so you know, after we rate the films that we watch, we update a list of all of our ratings in a document you can find in the podcast description. So, Carol, where do you rank Night on Earth?
You know, I just have such a fondness for this film's warmth towards its characters, its perspective on human experience, its ways of trying to kind of build connections and make us, I think, empathize with people of different backgrounds, you know, different cities, countries, and everything. And yeah, I think it's a small treasure of a film. I'm gonna give it 85 stars.
Right on. I will be left with the image of Isaac de Buncole's face lit by that lustrous light for so long. Like, I can just, it was indelibly stamped on my mind. And yeah, I'm just very glad that I got to reconnect with this film and got to see some favorites like Giancarlo Esposito. I'm giving this 89 stars.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Ebony, now it's the moment that I've been waiting for the entire show with much anticipation and excitement. When we come back for next week's episode of Cinemaball, what movie will we be discussing? What's next on the Cinemaball docket?
Okay, I just want to say to our audience, like, if you haven't gotten a sense yet of who Carolyn Pettit is as a film critic, as a viewer, and who I am as a film critic and as a viewer, this round is really going to hammer that home for you. So we go from Night on Earth. I am linking via Tom Waits in the soundtrack on Night on Earth to Tom Waits the actor in the 1992 gothic horror classic Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Oh my God, that is gonna be.
I have such fondness for this Boogle House film,
Yes.
and there is so much to talk about when it, like, woo boy, it's particularly when it comes to gender, you know, both from the
Yes.
original source material, but also this film's treatment of it, right? Plus, y'all know how I love to talk about horror and, like, you know, kind of, you know, horror adjacent shit. But really, this film has will always hold a place in my heart because, so I go to church and I go to a Black church. Carol, one Easter Sunday, if I'm lying, I'm flying. One Easter Sunday, a white dude was in church service. Again, I go to a Black church.
Yes.
He was dressed like Gary Oldman.
No.
And, yeah. You know when he comes to London and he's got that gray suit and the gray top hat and the glasses and whatever. So my church is packed out at Easter. Like, it's a full house. So he's just in the middle of an aisle, you know, and he was fine. Like, he wasn't showing out. He wasn't doing anything.
Okay.
But he was straight up in Gary Oldman as Count Vlad cosplay in the middle of my Black ass church on an Easter Sunday. This happened about 10 years ago. I've never recovered. And so this film, I'm never ever going to want to stop watching it just to remind me of that moment. So,
you know, I don't know if I'm really looking. I mean, I'm not looking forward to watching it, but I'm really looking forward to talking about it. And for a moment, as you were, you know, when you said linked to Tom Waits the actor, and you started saying 1990, I was like, oh God, are we gonna watch Mystery Men? Are we gonna watch with Ben Stiller as like Mr. Angry and Janine Garofalo as the bowler and like that?
You know what? I hadn't even thought of going that way. My initial choice was gonna be to link it through through Giancarlo Esposito to the 1994 film Fresh, which is fucking amazing. So if y'all haven't seen that film, do yourselves a favor. It will leave you absolutely breathless. Just amazing film. So anyways, that's what's going on. That is going to do it for us this week, folks. Thank you so much to Simplecast, which hosts both this podcast and our flagship show, Feminist Frequency Radio. Thanks also to our amazing producer, Sarah Norales, who really keeps the wheels on this thing. But most of all, thanks to all of you who listen to us every week. If you like this show, why not leave us a review and tell your friends about the hijinks we get up to over here when Anita's not around. All right, we'll see you back here next week for another jaw-dropping round of Cinemaball. Bye.
Later.